From high atop the Mott Foundation building in downtown Flint, welcome to Manley's Law Podcast. I cannot tell you how happy I am, first of all, to start this podcast to talk about relevant issues, things that are important to our community here in Flint, Michigan, and our nation. And today, I couldn't be more happy to have as my first guest, Genesee County Prosecutor David Leyton. David, welcome to the show.
Michael, thank you very much. Great to be with you.
I'll tell you, I had to have David the first podcast here. He is a man that has a long history, not only in the law, but also in radio. I know that you used to own in Flint WTAC, the Big Six.
That is true. Owned WTAC with my family. Before that, worked at WFDF for a number of years in an award-winning leading news operation headed by the late Les Root and also Mark Tanner. And before that, worked at WTRX with the late Art Reed with your news 15 minutes faster. And I started out as the rock and roll newsman at 105 FM, which is still rocking and rolling today.
Well, I would say he had a face for radio, but you see how handsome this man is, and I'll tell you, he's going to help me along a little bit here today. But this gentleman right here, David Leyton, is somebody that I look at as a mentor, somebody that I respect very much. I was telling one of my assistants today that David has what we call a moral center, and somebody that is well respected here in our community, and as well, he's respected nationally. And as Genesee County's prosecutor with one of the highest crime rates in the United States, tell me a little bit of how you feel about that job and what you do day to day.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. Very kind. I appreciate that very much. Every day's an adventure being the Genesee County prosecutor because you never know what's going to happen when you get to work. Many mornings my wife will say to me, do you have a busy day? Do you have a lot of appointments? And I'll say to her, not really, but you never know what's going to happen when you get down there. And every day is exciting. Every day I feel like there's something I can do to better the community. And every night when I go home, I hopefully feel like we've done something to make citizens safer, to make victims more secure, to give closure to victims. I mean, that's what the job's really all about. But Genesee County people are great people. There's a lot of goodness here. There's people who will give you the shirt right off their back, and they'll have nothing, but they would rather you have it. Those are the kind of people that live here, and that's true of most of mid-Michigan. So I love the job. I'm still really excited, and I'm hoping to keep it for some time yet.
Well, I don't think you'll have to worry about that. I talked about the Moral Center, and you talked about the people in Flint. You're from the East Coast, and I'm sure you're very proud of your parents. Tell us about how you got to Flint, David.
Well, I came to Flint in 1975. In the fall of 1975, I had graduated the University of Toledo with a degree in broadcast journalism.
Well, if I can interrupt, I think our guests need to know that you were also a football player for the Toledo Rockets, I believe.
That is true. I played 1 year for Toledo. It took me about that long to realize that I wasn't exactly going to make the first string. I was the tackling dummy. I was the scout team tailback, if you will. And when I was a freshman, Toledo was in the third straight year of being undefeated. And they had a really good team. There was a quarterback by the name of Chuck Ely, who later went on to an all-star career in the CFL. There was a fellow named Mel Long, who was a Green Beret from Vietnam, who came back and played ball at Toledo and went on to play for the Cleveland Browns. He used to tackle me in practice. And so after the first year, I decided maybe I just better be a student rather than a student athlete.
Did you ever get your Rudy moment at all? I mean, did you ever get into the game?
No, Rudy did better than I did.
Anyway, but you came from the Boston area and through Toledo and then into Flint in 1975?
Yeah, and what happened is I was an intern at a radio station in Toledo that bought 105 FM in Flint. And the owner of WCWA, WIOT in Toledo said to me, you want a full-time job when you graduate? And I said, well, yeah. They said, go to Flint. I said, where the heck is that? So I drove up 23 and I never looked back. Here
No.
I am all these years later.
In the mid-'70s, Flint was a vibrant town with the factories going 3 shifts and things like that, or was it starting to decline?
It was starting to decline, actually. I mean, we still had 60, 70,000 hourly workers, but that would soon disappear.
Right.
But when I came to Flint, it was because I wanted to be a journalist. I mean, my whole thing was I want to get on CBS or NBC and travel the world and be the next Mike Wallace or the next Dan Rather. And I thought, okay, here's an entry-level job. Remember, this is the time of Watergate.
Right.
A lot of people wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein, me among them. So I came up here, and that's when I enrolled in law school, thinking that that would enhance my resume, and I maybe could get the attention of CBS. Hey, this guy's a lawyer, a young lawyer with some credentials as a reporter. I had won a number of Associated Press awards, and I was already on CBS radio as a stringer. I would go to events around Michigan that were newsworthy nationally and sell the story to CBS over the telephone. That's how we used to do it.
So the trial lawyer that we know now was not necessarily in the cards when you first came to
That
Flint.
was the furthest thing from my mind. I wanted to be a globe-trotting journalist, go to the war zones, report with the mortars blowing up behind me, with a helmet on my head. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and Vietnam was just getting over, and so that was actually, during that time period, very, very important.
Correct.
And to report the news, as we're seeing nationally today,
Yeah.
a lot of the journalists are not getting the respect that probably they deserve of uncovering things that need to be done.
Well, back then, when Woodward and Bernstein were reporting on Watergate, journalists were held in a much higher regard than today. And of course, President Trump hasn't helped that by saying everything is fake news, which it is not. And I still have great respect for journalists and treat them well, even though now I'm answering their questions rather than me asking the questions.
And I think you've always been accessible to the public. You've always been accessible to the press. And as much as you can with confidentiality, you seem to like to give the public your opinion and some of the reasoning as to why you make certain decisions.
I think that's required of the person who holds my position. You have to have transparency. You have to let the public know why you're making the decisions you're making. Many times the public doesn't agree, or at least members of the public don't agree. But I think it's important that they know why I do what I do.
Yeah, and I don't know if any people know what a great trial lawyer David Leyton was in private practice. And one of the problems I have with some politicians is they've never been in the arena. And David, after you graduated from law school, you decided not to go into journalism and you became a trial lawyer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the reason I didn't pursue journalism was I met Therese Kaufman, who is my beloved wife of 38 years, and
a lovely lady.
yeah, indeed she is, and I didn't want to be away from her. And when you're a big-time journalist, you're on the road probably half the year. I think I remember reading at some time Mike Wallace said he was away from home 60 to 65% of the year. Well, once I met Therese, I didn't want to be away from home ever. I just wanted to be with her. So I hung a shingle. And my father-in-law, God rest his soul, Dr. Ben Kaufman, had a building right next to his orthodontic office on 3rd Avenue, gave me the building, fixed it up for me beautifully, and I was able to open up with very minimal cost. And because I had some name recognition from the radio reporting on WFTF, I was in business 6 months after I graduated, passed the bar, kept my job at the radio station for 6 months. Then I had to give it up because I had too much legal business. This would have been about 1983, I want to say. So the rest is history.
And I want to tell you, one of the things that I've noted in trial lawyers is when you play athletics, and David is very humble. And so I'm sure his University of Toledo football days and his high school days were a little more memorable than the humility he showed on his previous answers. But when you get into the fight in a courtroom as a trial lawyer, being a college athlete, being a high school athlete at a high level, can you correlate athletics with being a trial lawyer?
Oh, absolutely. It's competition. You're competing. You want to be the best. You want to win. You want to beat the other guy. And I think when you're a trial lawyer, especially when you're a criminal defense lawyer or a plaintiff or a civil defense lawyer, That's the most important thing. You're in there advocating for your client, you're competing, those athletic skills and that athletic mindset comes out. You want to win, you want to be the best between the lines, and right. The lines are the courtroom. Now, when you're a prosecutor, it's still true, but it's tamed a little bit by the need to do what's right. And there are times we realize that, hey, this isn't the worst person in America. This isn't the worst person walking Genesee County streets. And so maybe there needs to be some mercy in a particular case. So trial lawyering is a little tempered on the need to win when you're a prosecutor, as opposed to the criminal defense lawyer like you, who's advocating just for that client. That's your job. Our job's a little different. As a prosecutor, our job is justice. Our job is to do what's right. Sometimes doing what's right is not winning, believe it or not.
Yeah, and I understand that some of the people don't know David's background of being a trial lawyer, but I believe you've tried over 50 cases, and he always represented the people here in Genesee County and across Michigan, and you earned one of the highest reputations as a trial lawyer after putting the shingle out. So as we have gone along in your career, you've put the shingle out, you've become a successful trial lawyer here in Genesee County. What made you decide to go into politics?
Well, back when I was a journalist covering the Flint City Council, the County Board of Commissioners, the school board, I used to sit there and think, would I have made that same decision if I was sitting in their chairs? And at some point in time, I decided, I'd like a shot at that. I'd like to attempt to be one of those lawmakers, one of those public officials. I got involved in Democratic politics as a fundraiser, mostly. I was raising money on behalf of good candidates like Don Regal, Dale Kildee, Jim Blanchard, who became a very good friend of mine, Bob Carr, who was our congressman for a while and then ran for the Senate, Debbie Stabenow. All these people have had fundraisers in Therese and my homes. You've been to them.
I've been to them.
So that's how I first got involved with it. And then in, I want to say 1992, Sally Shaheen Joseph, who I had gone to law school with, and she would actually sing to me in the carpool to keep me awake driving. She has a beautiful voice. She said, I'm going to run for Township Supervisor. Would you like to run on my ticket as a trustee? And I said, you know what? I've been looking for an office. Maybe I'll give it a shot. So in that year, 1992, I would leave my law office on Linden Road every day about noon, starting in May, and go knock on doors of Democratic voters. I had done some research on who they were, and I wore out 3 pairs of shoes that summer, and I came in first in the primary. And if you come in first in a Democratic primary in Flint Township or Genesee County, you're going to win the election, because the Republicans aren't as strong in our county as they are elsewhere. So that was my first elected office, and that's how I got into it.
And you were able to leave your law practice in the capable and able hands of your partner, Frank Castle, who's also a wonderful person, wonderful attorney, wonderful friend of yours.
Great guy, but my recollection is our profit and loss statement wasn't that great that year. That's my recollection.
Yeah, I don't know. Frank may have a different one than that.
He may have been on vacation a little bit that summer.
Yeah. Well, I remember you in Flint Township politics, practicing law in Genesee County, and then I believe in 2004, you put your hat in for Genesee County Prosecutor, which is a very, very important, prominent, and powerful position that can affect everybody's lives. What made you want to become the Genesee County Prosecutor at that time?
Well, I knew after 12 years I wasn't going to sit on the township board anymore. It's a very difficult job. I don't care what township it is, a city, a village, a school board. Those local positions are the toughest of all, because people come right up to you and tell you what they think, and oftentimes it's not favorable. I was looking for a position that I could combine the law and public service, and the prosecuting job is the perfect job for that. Art Bush was the prosecutor. He came to me and said, I'm not going to run again. I would never have run against Art, because he was a very good friend of mine, still is. And even though I may not have agreed with everything he did as prosecutor, I kind of have a loyal streak in me, and if I'm your friend, I'm going to always be your friend. So I wasn't going to run against Art, but when he came to me and said, I'm not going to run again, that's when I decided I think that's the job for me. I'd really like to have that position. So I made the announcement in January of '04, and we took off with a great campaign. It was a lot of hard work. I had a very, very accomplished opponent who had run once before, and it was close, but I won the Democratic primary, and then there was a Republican candidate that year, and I was able to easily win that fall general election. And fortunately, Mike, I have not had an opponent since then.
Well, I think that speaks volumes. I have to make a disclaimer to our audience is that I've been one of your biggest supporters and biggest fans from 2004 on, and people probably wonder, just our jobs are an adversarial type of position. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. This is the prosecutor. But as in politics, there is loyal opposition. There is honor. There is trust. And I can tell you from my personal perspective, the reason nobody has ever run against you is because you are honorable, you are loyal, you are trustworthy, your word means something. And I think, as I said earlier about that moral center and having compassion, this gentleman has it, and I don't think anybody's ever going to run against you. So I think that's a testament to a politician, somebody who runs for elected office, to not have an opponent. I think that speaks volumes.
Well, you're very kind to say all that, and it humbles me, but I try to have an open door policy because I think it's helped me that I practiced law as long as I did, some 20 plus years, and I know how difficult it is to be a practicing lawyer. It's not easy to represent your client, to try to run a business, to try to make a profit, to try to be in 5 places at once, to have judges saying, well, why aren't you in my courtroom when you're in another courtroom? I've always recognized and remembered that. So I try to make it as easy as I can on the practicing bar to work with my office. And if that means you'd like a meeting with me, my door's open. I can't always accommodate everybody's wishes. I can't always say, yeah, I can give you that negotiated plea. But we listen, we try to work things out. I am grateful for your support all these many years. And I think the audience ought to know that your word is your bond. And when somebody can make arrangements on a case by just a shake of the hand, a nod, a wink, that means everything. Because a lot of times in the law, and especially you see some of the out-of-town lawyers not understanding how it works here in Genesee County, we have a pretty good bar association, and we're all friends. I mean, we may disagree on an outcome of a case, but we're all friends. We get along wonderfully. We see each other after hours. And that's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be where you may fight like the devil. You may joust, and then at night you toast each other. That's the way it's supposed to work in the law and in politics. And around here in the law, it works that way. In politics, elsewhere, not so much.
I agree with you. And one of the things that I can assure you about David Leyton, it's not an easy job. It's a tough job. And people think I have a tough job when I'm representing somebody. And I see mental health issues. I see drug issues. I see veterans that are suffering, people with alcohol addictions. And in our community, it's ravaged our community, all the things that I have indicated. What have you seen, and I'll preface the question, kind of lay it out, is that politicians usually don't win elections by talking about drug treatment, talking about treatment for veterans, talking about treatment for alcohol addictions. We want to be tough on crime. We want to build more prisons. We want to lock them up. And it almost bankrupted Michigan with Proposal B and Truth in Sentencing, and I know you've had some high-level positions with the Michigan Prosecuting Attorneys Association. How have you seen criminal justice reform from the time of building more prisons, lock them up, to these specialty courts, and how your office uses those now?
We've come, I don't want to say full circle, because if you come full circle, we'd be back to building more prisons, wouldn't we? So we've come about 180 degrees away from build more prisons, and that's true of even the far right wing, the Republican types, who don't want that anymore either, but for different reasons than the leftists folks don't want it. The more liberal people don't want it because they think that prison doesn't help. There's no reason to send anybody to prison, and we ought to try to help all these folks. The right-wing people don't want more prisons because they don't want to pay for them. And most of those people don't live in the urban areas where the true violent crime is occurring. You can find me kind of halfway in between in my beliefs. I believe that there are certain individuals that have to go to prison if they are convicted of particular crimes, mostly violent crimes, and there's just no great hope that they can be rehabilitated. But there's many, many people who, because of what you've mentioned, drug addiction, mental health issues, post-traumatic stress disorders from serving in the military, homelessness, the fact that they've never actually been able to establish roots anywhere. Perhaps they're the victims of crimes themselves, like human trafficking. So what we've done is we've established all these specialty courts in Michigan, and especially in Genesee County, we lead the state in the number of specialty courts that there are. The only other county that's even close to us is Washtenaw County. So we have all these specialty courts where we try to, instead of sending somebody to incarceration, we send them to a court that can help them get off drugs, find the mental health treatment that they need, get help for PTSD, so things like that. The only problem with specialty courts is that my office, which has to be the gatekeeper of all those courts, which means we're the ones who decide whether somebody gets to go to them or not. That requires us to read the reports, read the mental health reports, read the drug addiction reports. We don't get any funding for it. The court gets all the funding. We get nothing, yet it's a separate docket. Each one of those is like another judge that I have to send an assistant prosecutor to staff the court. And I have preached this statewide in the Prosecuting Attorneys Association meetings where every time it's brought up, they all look at me and go, Leyton's going to go on this again, and I do. I've brought it up to the state court administrators. There's been like 4 or 5 of them in my 14-year tenure so far. I haven't gotten anywhere. So I haven't been as effective in my lobbying on that as I have been in my support for specialty courts, which I wholeheartedly support.
Yeah, and I think I can indicate for the record and be very clear, politically I would describe you as a centrist, somebody whose common sense dictates where we go. I've probably worn out the carpet to your office pleading on my client's behalf. There's been times that I've been able to provide you that documentation that you're comfortable with, and there's other times you've politely told me there's really nothing that you can do. And I've always indicated about David Leyton that a lot of his decisions, not all of them, a lot of his decisions are victim-driven. He cares about what the victims feel. He cares about the effects that it has on the victim, closure for the victim, and the rules that you have to follow, because sometimes victims want life in prison and it's just not possible. And I want to segue into something where, again, we go back to athletics, that David Leyton is one of the top football officials in the state of Michigan. And I know it's a passion of yours. I don't know if the public knew that. But on Friday nights, you can see him at probably some of our local high school football fields leading a crew. I've seen you do state championship games at Ford Field, and I've talked to many people in the community, and we go from rules of court to rules on the football field, and everybody says you're dynamite at both. And is that something that just helps relieve some of the pressure that you have to go through?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it gives me a few hours where I don't have to be concerned about criminal law and the cases. But I can tell you, I can find a few coaches who might disagree with what you just said about my ability as an official. I'll tell you one quick story. We were doing a game out in Linden some years ago, and the lights went out. It was a Friday night, the lights were on, and then all of a sudden the lights went out. And if you've ever been to a ball game where they bring the lights back on, they come back on slowly. They don't just pop back on full blast. They come up slowly when they, reissue the circuit. So the lights are coming back on slowly, and maybe they're up half speed. And Denny Hopkins, who's the great coach at Linden and a great guy, but he can get on me, as he should. He calls me over. He says, "What do you think? Can you see good enough to start the game?" And I go, "Coach, even when the lights are on full blast, you don't think I can see?" So, I mean, that's just one fun story that's out there. I love officiating. But let me get back to your other issue about victims. Victims in the criminal law are almost everything. We think about the fact if you're a victim of crime, and maybe you have been. I have been. My law office on 3rd Avenue was broken into several times. Some precious items that I never got back were stolen. You know, things like pictures of my children when they were little. It's traumatic to be a victim of crime. And you couple the trauma of being a victim of crime with the trauma of, okay, now they want me to come to court. And I'm a layperson. I don't even know where the courthouse is. And I don't know how to dress, and I don't know how to park, and I don't know where the courtroom is, and I don't know what they want me to say when I get there. And what if I have to see the person who did this to me? And think about it if it's a criminal sexual conduct, sexual assault type of case. So the trauma for the victim is so great, and we make it worse for them by having them come to court. So I'm always conscious of my responsibility to those victims of crime. I give them input. By constitution, by statute, I have to give them input, but I do it anyways. But ultimately, I have to make the decision, not the victim. Ultimately, I have to decide how to handle the case with the victim's input, but it comes to rest on me. As one of my assistants said, heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Right.
And some days that's how I feel. But I love the football officiating part. I appreciate you bringing it up. I've done several state finals, and this year I got to do the All-Star game, which was really a lot of fun because they did it like how the old XFL used to do. There was a cameraman right on the field with us. And he says, "I won't get in your way." And I said, "Well, I'm not getting near you. You're carrying like 500 pounds of camera equipment. That wouldn't feel good."
Right.
But it was really a cool experience. That was just a couple of weeks ago.
Well, I'll tell you what, I could go on and on and on in talking to you, and I can't thank you enough for being on my initial podcast of Manley's Law. I'm going to beg and ask and plead that you come back, because I think there's so much that you and I can talk about to inform our community. There is so much that we could talk about to maybe help heal people, make people understand our justice system. And I just have a great time when I'm with you. And again, I can't thank you enough, David. You're a good friend, you're a good man, and nothing but respect.
It is my total pleasure to be here. You're going to be a smash hit as a podcaster.
Well, I think I'm a smash hit because of my guest. Again, I want to thank everybody from high atop the Mott Foundation building in downtown Flint with my guest, Genesee County Prosecutor David Leyton.